How are you?
Fantastic. How are you doing?
So much better than I was the past 3 weeks. I finally finished most of my shit.
End up drinking yesterday?
No, I
No?
stayed in. I
Res-
went to bed at 9:30,
huh. How
but I
responsible.
already told. I know, but I already told two of my buddies that they could crash at my place. So, because I was supposed to go out with them, or with my friend and then one of his friends, and so I was just like, you can still crash here, but I'm just gonna go to sleep right now and I'm gonna keep my ringer on and you're just gonna have to call me twice to wake me up. So I got two calls 3 a.m. and I was like, what is happening? And I was like, oh, I remember. I'm hosting people.
You're in college. You're not supposed to be like an old person. That
Literally,
sounds like a parent.
I I keep texting my mom and I keep being like, the genetics that you gave me are just pure old lady.
Boring. But responsible. Good work.
Did you go out?
Did I go out?
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I also stayed in like an old person. I had to. I ended up like the day before I went out. I was up until like 4 or something. But then I had to work the next day. I had to teach psych and English for like 7 hours, so I was just way too tired. So I ended up being an old person and staying. But today I have a friend's
That's
birthday,
brutal.
so after this I'll go out, probably.
One of my buddies is visiting um right now, and I didn't know that he was here. He got me my first debate job, and he, whatever. He's a very good friend, and so I'm excited to see him this week now. But I already had plans to go out tonight, but it's not gonna be crazy because I have class.
Hmm. Hi, Mr. Fufu. How are you doing? I promise this time we'll try not to bombard you with questions like last time. I think Peter was supposed. I think Peter was supposed to join today as well. Wait.
So I think he was waiting.
Yeah. I think I've read Problema 3 like 3 times already. Like over and over and over. Cause I'm getting confused. I'm getting confused halfway through.
That's how I was for the first 2 pages of Problema 2. I was like, what is happening?
I'm starting to show some wear and tear. I accidentally ripped a hole in his face. The poor guy.
I at the tournament a few weekends ago, last weekend, whenever it was really embarrassing because I carry all of my books in a separate bag than my backpack, which has all of my debate stuff in it. And I was rushing out of the hotel, and so I threw my caffeine for the day, a canned coffee and a sugar-free Red Bull, into my book bag, and I forgot that I had a hardcover book in there, and it punctured the bottom of the Red Bull can. So I was getting dirty looks from businessmen because it looked like I was shotgunning my Red Bull, but really I was just trying to prevent it from ruining all of my books. But they were seatbelted in, so it actually didn't end up mattering. It didn't even warp them that bad.
Shotgunning Red Bulls? That's peak high school.
Yeah, it's peak high school debate. My mom used to not let me drink Red Bulls at tournaments, and I used to have my friends buy me Red Bulls and bring them to me in round.
A Red Bull boot? That's funny. Hi, Cade. Hello. I don't think you've been here before. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I have not.
Well, welcome. Have you done some of the reading? Or are you caught up or
I've
familiar?
read I read his book a few years ago. I mean, I've read I think about 10 of his books. So,
Oh, damn.
yeah, I'm pretty well-rounded. I kind of caught up on Problema 3. Is that what you're doing right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're
Where
just
he talks about
the
the hiddenness and the ethical and universal, yada yada.
Yeah, yeah, basically. It's just talking about why Abraham kept it a secret from Sarah and Isaac and the servant. Like, why did he withhold this, what he was going to do to them, since it seems to be
Right.
something unethical, something that Kant wouldn't do, or Hegel.
Right.
But
Not
10
according
is
to
worth which
transcendental
one?
value.
Which books did you read? Because I've
Um,
only read like Sickness Unto Death, Either or, and then this one. So I'm not very well read.
I've read Either or, Fear and Trembling, Repetition Separate, so I counted that. Sickness Unto Death, The Concept of Anxiety, Philosophical Fragments, The Lily of the Field, Bird of the Air. I'm almost done with Works of Love and concluding Unscientific Postscript.
Mhm.
I don't know how many that was, actually, but close to 10.
Yeah.
Why so much Kierkegaard?
He just is really therapeutic for me. I mean,
Real.
I've been kind of like a Christian my whole life, but I don't like a lot of the stuff Christians do. I don't like fundamentalism. That's kind of what I grew up in. So he kind of spoke to me in a
Wait,
way that made sense finally, you know? It made
like, what
things
did you
fit
grow
together.
up? Like Southern Baptist? Like, what is the?
Evangelical.
Okay, where are you from?
I'm from Wisconsin.
I'm from Chicago.
Oh, nice.
I go to U of M though.
Nice.
So did you go to school or like university for this stuff, or did you just pick it up on your own?
Well, I've been reading philosophy for a very long time. I'm currently doing psychology in school. I'm thinking
Sweet.
of going to cognitive science to, because it's interdisciplinary, it can grab some philosophy, give more credibility.
Yeah,
But I wanted to do something that actually engages with people more and helps people more than just philosophizing, I guess.
that's awesome. That's exactly what I studied in. I did psychology and philosophy, but like my thesis was in cognitive philosophy of cognitive science, philosophy of psychology.
Yeah, so I'm still undecided fully in my career path.
But have you started your or how far in are you?
Yeah, it's an online course. WGU is what the school is called. It's self-paced, so they literally just dump all the 4 years of work to get your bachelor's, and you go through it at your own pace. So I could get it done in like 2 years if I go fast.
Oh yeah, that's crazy. That's a
That
lot of
makes
like
sense.
responsibility on you.
Yeah, I prefer it though too, because you pay every 6 months. So if you get it done sooner, you don't pay as much.
Very cool. That's incentive.
Right. So,
All of your tests, like, do you ever interact or like have meetings with these professors, or is it all just like
oh
pre-made
yeah.
course? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they have classes every week. I mean a lot of it is pre-recorded. The tests you have to like have a separate camera on you while you take them.
Yeah.
So,
Huh. That's sweet.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, bridging the gap between philosophy and like what do you like practical philosophy? Applied philosophy? That's an interesting area.
Yeah. Are you into like then like the pragmatists and stuff?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like pretty much.
'Cause they're very
But I yeah,
anti-intellectual applied.
yeah, no, but I err on the side of, or I like prefer the research and theory. So like
Mhm.
lab work and discovery as opposed to anything clinical or like feel like a
Sure.
therapeutic. But yeah.
Right. I mean, people help all in their own ways. So,
Yeah, it's like it's the information you get from the researchers that you can apply. Um, but yeah, it's really I think yeah, it's the therapists that end up doing the the heavy lifting when it comes to like applying the philosophy.
well, right, because they have a bunch of disjointed information. Now they got to help a individual person.
Yeah. True.
So,
Okay, well I don't know if who is this? I don't know if Peter's gonna join in. He's late probably. So I guess we can get started without him. And a couple of other people usually join, but I don't know, Halloween weekend, maybe they're busy. But as a brief overview of for I guess any people watching the recording, a brief overview of what we're talking about today. We're talking about Problema 3 in Fear and Trembling. This whole book has been about this competition, this tug and pull, this like division between what Kierkegaard considers the ethical or the universal, which within it is contained things like social norms, relationships, laws, uh, just the basic rules that societies live under and have to respect in order for them to function. It's the battle between this sphere, this world, and what he calls the religious sphere or faith, which supersedes, which comes first, or should come first, in the eyes of maybe not Kierkegaard, but Johannes de Silencio, which is like the pseudonym he's working under. In Problema 3, the big question is in regards to the story of Abraham, which is super briefly a story of a man who is told by God to go sacrifice his son, his only son Isaac, or not his only son, but his son Isaac, um, at the top of Moriah, a mountain, and yeah, it's something he doesn't want to do, but he's told that he has to do it. So the whole question in this chapter is, was it ethically defensible or defendable for Abraham to conceal or to hide or to lie basically about what he was going to do to Abraham? I mean to Isaac. From Isaac and from his wife and from his servant and his other son. Um, Basically, yeah, it's tackling that one. So one thing we have to consider before we start talking about it is that the world of the ethical, um, it it doesn't allow concealment or lying. I think a decent analogy or a decent way to look at it would be like a categorical imperative, like things that you just shouldn't do. That if everyone did it, the world wouldn't work out, societies wouldn't work out. So things like lying. Um, it's things like lying and not being transparent that shouldn't be allowed in this ethical world. So for that reason, maybe it wasn't an ethical thing to do to withhold this truth from Isaac and his wife. Um, then another thing to keep in mind is the inexplicability and subjectivity of faith. It's not something you can demonstrate or prove outwardly. It's a very individual, a very personal relationship that you have to God. Unlike the ethical, where it's relationships with other people that these are things that are demonstratable or obvious. So the isolation of this faith, um, of what he would call this knight of faith or the Abraham in this story. So those are some things to keep in mind. Other than that, there's no more overview we need to get into. So with that being said, what did you think about uh, about the question being asked or the stuff being discussed in Problema 3? What I was thinking about most of the time is whether or not, if we accept Kierkegaard's or Johannes's statements here that that the universal can be superseded by this religious or this faith, um, how can a society ever function that way properly? It seems like if something's always trumping what's ethical, there's going to be a lot of friction in any given society. There's going to be people who just simply disagree or go against the rules. And that kind of like opens up room for contradictory actions. And if there's no law that determines what's good and what's wrong, then this personal faith that everyone might claim to have, it's going to like, I don't know, it could in some cases just lead to chaos and anarchy. But I don't know. That's kind of like my question. How can you have a cohesive society if in it, every individual claims or has this faith that's telling them to act against or contrary to the ethical. Because it seems to happen very often. Yeah.
I mean, I can try to explain the best I can my understanding. Johannes, it says in Kierkegaard's own writing, in his point of view, that Johannes is in the aesthetic sphere himself. And what this book is Johannes trying his hardest to understand that exact question you just asked. Right? This book is kind of like a stepping stone into Kierkegaard's actual philosophy. So if you read, for example, Kierkegaard's self-authored works, he will not describe faith as absurd, and he will not use terms like leap of faith or absurd. This is a construction of, well, actually, if you read repetition as well, leap of faith, it's Constantinus, whatever his name is. What Johannes is trying to do, though, is trying to understand morality through reason alone, through systematic philosophy. He's trying to understand faith. And Kierkegaard is kind of showing that you cannot understand faith simply through logical propositional reasoning here, through the vessel of Johannes.
So there's no real moves being made in the domain of argumentation being taken by Johannes here. It seems that he's just presenting the issue, but he's not presenting any type of like logical argument for why this should be
He's
one.
trying to.
What is this?
I mean, one of my favorite, I'm not sure if it was Fear and Trembling, but there was a line where I forgot which one. He says, like, Hegel says faith is easy, meaning it can be put into a system. But every time, I look at Abraham or the Bible, like, I'm annihilated. Basically, like, I can understand ethics intellectually, but then when we actually go out into the real world and practice it, it's a lot more messy. I can't account for every single situation.
Isn't like, at least my understanding of the book too, because I'm reading it for like, it happened to be on the syllabus for a class and we just got to it, and so like my understanding, like, for part of that is that he's trying to say that like faith cannot be, like, you cannot apprehend it or cannot make sense of it in the context of the ethical, right? Or like what like true faith is just that like it's something that you cannot apply typical codes of like morality to because of scripture.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I mean, his name is Johannes di Silencio, Johannes the Silent. He's trying to. Johannes, the thing he does understand is that faith is not something to be spoken about, it's enacted. In like more of his self-authored works, like The Lily of the Field and Bird of the Air, he goes deeper into how you can actually see faith and how you can see love and joy. And he uses the verse in Matthew that a tree is known by its fruits. So he's basically saying that to have faith, you have to. I like the idea of a gardener. When you're a gardener, you can't make a tree grow, but you can set the conditions and you can cultivate it. It's not something you can just force or define like directly. It has to be, I don't know, like you have to participate in the process. It's not just an intellectual exercise.
That seems a little bit to be like
Is-
consequentialist though, doesn't it? If a gardener's fruits or his bearings, what he yields, is his demonstration of faith, then it's like what he showed something to be, and not the gardener himself, in a little bit of a way.
Well, the gardener could also just kill the plant. It's somewhere in the middle, right? The gardener has some control, but he doesn't. In the end, basically, God has the control, is what Kierkegaard's going to say. But in the end, if you cultivate it properly, you should get good fruits. It's not always going to happen. Life isn't quite that simple either. You can try your hardest to make things great and things still go bad, but you still do have this existential control over it. This if you go into repetition, he talks about we can't ever experience the same thing again, but we can use that to propel us forward. It's like a remembering forward rather than Socratic recollecting. But yeah, he also talks about faith's hiddenness. So
Yeah.
you can go ahead.
What would be the appropriate book? Because like the common view is that the next step in Kierkegaard's works is sickness unto death. But you having read a bunch of the other books, would you put another book uh before that one if you're to read his books then
It
like
depends on what you want.
yeah.
It depends
Is
what you're
fiction
looking for.
is that self-authored?
The sickness unto death is under another pseudonym, but this pseudonym he actually puts above himself. So he puts this pseudonym further along in his faith journey than even he is. And just so you know, that pseudonym never uses absurd, never uses leap of faith. The terms are very clearly defined. Yes, there's still paradox involved, but it's especially with his self-authored works, there's not much irony. There's not much like hidden messaging in it. It's very straightforward and clear.
And I think his pseudonym is Anticlimatus, Climaticus or something like
Yeah,
that.
so the original pseudonym was Johannes Climacus, which that pseudonym is a philosopher who doesn't believe in God but tries to define God philosophically,
Mhm.
like the best he can. So he says, like in philosophical fragments, he says the God. He doesn't say God. He tries to philosophize his way through it using like the Socratic method. And Anticlimacus isn't like the opposite, but like above.
More so than the anything in Problema 3. I like the epilogue the most. I think it was the most nicely written part of the book. Of this one at least.
I gotta go back to that. I don't remember it. Let's see.
It's talking about how faith is or it pretty much just goes over how there's no like stepping stones in faith that you can use from previous generations. That faith is like a journey that each new generation starts at the exact same point. It's not like technology or society that builds from the last generation. It's something like very, very individual. Each person starts at the exact same starting point. Some people don't get that far, some people get very far. But he wrote it super nicely there, I think. Instead, many in every generation may not come that far, but none comes further. Whether there are also many who do not discover it in our own age, I leave open. I can only refer to my own experience, that one of whom makes no secret of that fact, that he has far to go, yet without therefore wishing to deceive either himself or what is great by reducing this latter to a triviality, to a children's disease which one must hope to get over as soon as possible. Life has tasks enough, even for one who fails to come as far with faith. And when he loves these honestly, life won't be a waste either, even if it can never compare with that of those who had a sense of the highest and grasp. So it's like faith is something up here that very, very few ever get to, but everyone starts off at the same floor.
But there's also a progression, right? Like when he says that every generation is getting closer, like there seems to be like at least a progression in the ethical that's moving towards um like an ethical that is more conducive to faith.
Well, that's Hegel's. That would be closer to Hegel's view or point, that we're marching towards an
Well,
absolute.
right. But I guess that's like what I'm curious about is like, I mean, because even in the context of like, like the dialectic, like what is, I guess, like the endpoint for Kierkegaard's philosophy? Like, if it's not faith, is it just getting as close to it as you can, given like where you started?
That's the goal to strive to get as close as possible, I would think.
Why wouldn't you strive for the real thing though? Like most like ideal theories, like you strive for like the most like the best notion of it, and then when you end up falling short, like yeah, like you kind of inevitably end up falling short.
I kind of think of it partly as like I don't know if you guys have read any like process philosophy, but it's like there
Yeah, like
isn't an end
possible
point.
religions.
Like it's constantly in process. Like if you read The Sickness Unto Death, he talks about the self never having a static point. It's just always dynamically growing. And I think Johannes is trying to point to that a bit. Kierkegaard is pretty solid though in faith. If you read Works of Love, you'll get a pretty solid grasp of what he thinks. And he's very clear. So
That was my his Kierkegaard's description of the self in Sickness Unto Death is probably the most infuriating page of Kierkegaard I've ever written. I don't like it whatsoever. I
the self
think
is a relation which relates itself to itself. Yeah.
the human being is spirit. But what is spirit? The spirit is self. But what is self? The self is a relation which relates to itself, or that in the relation which it's relating into itself. The self is not the relation, but the relation relating. Come on.
That's what
That
I
Yeah,
feel
he
about Aristotle's like De Interpretatione, whatever, book 9, chapter 9. He does the same thing. It's like if it has been, then it must art like does like it's on like predetermination, but it's the same annoying sentence structures.
he does that sometimes too in other books. Usually he's trying to like say all of these parts are the beginning and all are in relation and all cultivate something. So say like God is wisdom, but like God is a starting point, then leads to wisdom, but wisdom is a starting point, then leads to God, and then he just keeps going. It's
That's
a very common
that's
thing he does.
that's what I mean. Like that. Ugh. I like. I feel like I just read the classics into everything, but that's what um like Boethius does. Like that's like what a lot of like medieval philosophers do. Is they take the like uh dual approach, and like God is both being and is like traits, right? Like God is like personified.
Yeah,
Boethius says like God
Kierkegaard
is
too is
like
just trying to mess with you. I mean, he messes with sentence structure all the time, so he'll put instead of like subject, verb, object, he'll like reverse it, and he'll just try to. I don't know. He's just a really interesting writer.
is that like a translational thing? Just because I know he's the only
that's what
In
I was.
Danish, he's
like
also confusing.
yeah. But like Sartre calls him in Scripture Method. He'll call him like the Dane or like the Danish philosopher because there's only the one. Um,
Right.
and I feel like the way I don't know, like maybe it's something about the translation though, but it's also in Danish. You said it's mirrored.
I mean, from what
Or
I read posts about because I wanted to learn some Danish. So I was reading like people reading Kierkegaard. They're like Kierkegaard is just as confusing in Danish. Sentence structure is very similar to English, and he still just completely has fun with language. He doesn't really follow any rules.
I don't think the
I
sentences are
mean,
the.
a lot of these points are straightforward, but he makes them sound complicated.
It's the word choice that he uses, not so much like the structure of the sentences, but the word choice. Like once you use a word like starting point or ending point, when you're trying to define something of what he's trying to define, like the self, it's like you're already lost half the audience. It seems like you're using the wrong words here.
He, yeah, he's something. I'll say that. Just wait till you get to him using was it sagacity all the time, just wisdom. If
what
you
does
didn't
that
know,
mean? Wisdom.
like it's similar. It's like a wisdom that like penetrates or like it, I don't know how else to explain it, but he uses that all the time in his. It's really annoying to me.
You guys have any quotes or questions that you had while reading? Well, I guess just Fufu and Lily. Unless you have something in your manuscripts, Kate. I think at the beginning of the chapter he says, let's concern ourselves, or let's read or try and understand all of this from the point of view of the aesthetic. So that's what I tried my best to do. I had to like put my shoes in the absolute aesthete. And the only types of questions that would come up for me were ones relating to society and order. So like trying to reach into the ethical, not fully getting there. Things like if we can have a proper society, if individuals only act in alignment with this unique relationship that they have, how is society supposed to handle or deal with individuals who are acting in relation to this alignment? Seems like an impossible task for like a police force or for a government. If they accept the fact that this personal relationship comes above the ethical, then they just have their hands tied behind their back and they can't do anything. Like, okay, now you know what? He did that. He claims to have had this alignment or divine inspiration or divine.
Maybe I'm reading into it, but I feel like like at least in like the first problem, like he talks about the people who try to justify their actions as being like the same call that like Abraham had, and he like calls them sinners. Pretty like he's like if you desire to be um like tested by God in the way that Abraham was, like it's like you're not grasping what faith is, right?
Yeah, it's the desire.
Yeah,
Like I
I
feel
mean,
like
yeah.
yeah, but I feel like he like I don't think it's necessarily just the desire. I think it's like it's also that if you want it, you're not going to get it firstly, but then it's like if you want to act or if you're like justifying your actions by saying like I just think he also says that they're like mentally ill at some point. Maybe I'm going crazy.
Like I
I
understand.
mean, a lot. Go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, as a lot of Kierkegaard, he's criticizing the Christendom of his time.
Yeah.
So, if I were like fundamentalist Christians are very literal, so let's just use that. It's like if I'm a fundamentalist Christian, I'm just going to read the 10 commandments as propositions, right? Well, it doesn't say in the 10 commandments that I can't abuse my child, so I guess I can do it, right? He's pointing at these people who read it very literally. And he's like, if you take this very propositional, logical view, like you would be acting out these horrific things. You wouldn't be able to understand Abraham at all. You would just like literally try to sacrifice your own son because that's what the Bible's. It's very literal.
Do you think the first 11 books of Genesis are literal or symbolic?
I'm not sure. I just try to get what value I can out of it. I mean, I think like Adam and Eve, it's like if you go in the concept of anxiety, that book is all about Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
And he kind of talks about the introduction of anxiety. Anxiety is freedom's possibility. So, how can you commit sin before there's sin? Well, you introduce freedom. You introduce consciousness type of thing. So I think it's kind of like maybe an evolutionary like tale, like almost like a meta analysis of the beginning of human like freedom, I guess.
Do you think it's problematic to not? Do you think it's problematic to ever not be certain whether or not the Bible is supposed to be taken as like an interpretive story versus a literal one? Or is it okay to just suspend this judgment and not know?
I think we spend so much time trying to say, well, actually, for everything Jordan Peterson says wrong, I think he really nailed this point. He said the problem with fundamentalists is not whether like the Bible is objective or not. It's that we're always going to be interpreting it through a subjective lens. So we can spend all this time interpreting it without actually living it. I think the objectivity starts to reveal itself when you actually like live as a Christian, at least according to
As it's pointed in this book, objectivity it matters when these ideas, these thoughts, these interpretations manifest themselves into actions. because then once they become actions or justified actions through interpretation of text, then it's within like the world of the ethical, right? Once you start having actions that kind of butt against each other, it's in the world of the ethical and of relationships and of society.
I lost my train of thought. I was going to respond with something. I mean, I think he's starting somewhere else. I think is what he's trying to say. Like, can I learn how to swim by just reading a book called How to Swim? You know, do I know what it's like to have my first kiss if I've never had it just by someone telling me about it? There's knowing doesn't actually come from the propositional, it comes from the relational, the participatory. I kind of like Heidegger. Heidegger talks about how tradition can kind of mask things. Our words are kind of masking things. Like we don't actually remember the experience of faith. We just describe it. While these people had to legitimately just experience it. Like you need to go through it first before you can even put words to it. Like he's reversing the way we view faith instead of from the top down, from the bottom up.
I think even that claim though, there's discussion or debate in philosophy of mind, like the Qualia's thought experiment of like Mary in the room and the apple. Like, can she ever know what the color red is, or learn how to swim, like you said, by just reading up on it or being explained by it? And there's two camps. Some people, and I think I'm more sympathetic to this view. Like, no, they're different things. The phenomenology of something, the experience of something, is a little bit isolated from any type of description or like reading you can do on it. But there is a pretty like there's a minority that don't think so. I think if you truly could be explained how to swim in a textbook so properly, so beautifully, you would know how to swim at the end of the day. Same thing with the feeling
Well,
of
you still need to swim. You still need to jump in the water, though.
the action of swimming would be different. That would be the test. But whether or not you know how to
But
swim,
that's reality, right? That's these words mean so a lot of what Kierkegaard says. Like he's like, I could make the most beautiful philosophical system, political system, whatever. I could write it down perfectly and beautifully, but it would be useless if I did not live it. Right?
that's
He's
what
not
people.
saying that these are wrong.
Yeah, but some people think you could. Like it would be the same thing to live through something and for it to be explained to you perfectly. I disagree with that. But I know there's a minority of people who very stubborn, I don't know if that's a word, but who very stubbornly um, will disagree. I don't know what to say to those people.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of more of like a Neoplatonic Kierkegaardian like view of things. I think in my view, what's happened is we've divorced meaning from the world. So we've retreated further and further back into our head. Descartes literally severed our connection with the world, with our relation with the world. Kant, even, I've only limited experience of Kant, but he kind of almost speaks of the mind like it's a prison and that we just get fed information through. I think this view comes from a very self-centered point of view, right? A lot of German idealism is very self-centered. Like we start with the self and then we go outwards. A lot of what I like is starting with the relational or even the other. If you know about Levinas, he's like really extreme other. But we took meaning out of the world. We don't think the world shapes us anymore. We just think we shape the world. While it goes both ways. So a lot of these people are like, well, it's just my mind imposing ideas. It's just, and yes, I can never fully grasp the thing that's in front of me, but that doesn't mean I'm not in contact with reality. I'm in contact with the limited part, but I'm still in contact, right? I'm not just shaping the microphone in front of my face, it's shaping me too. It's communicating information to me as well, not just me to it. You know, I don't know if that makes sense, but
The only thing that doesn't make sense to me about that is like how you would say like how you would work that into like a Neoplatonic view, right? Well,
Well, that's-
because like I'm like I don't know, like I feel like the Theaetetus and the Meno both have like the Meno slave demonstration, which like shows that learning is recollection and isn't something like isn't that connection that we have with reality. So I guess that would be where I'm curious. But
Oh, right.
other
So
than
this is
that,
where you add the Christianity in. So Augustine
okay,
was a Neoplatonic
yeah.
philosopher for a while.
I just finished on free choice of the will, and I read bits
Right.
of Confessions this summer.
Right. So I think Christianity, well, Augustine's Neoplatonic version, I mean, he found the same issues somewhat. When he synthesizes that with Christianity, I think it turns into something a lot more meaningful than whatever we have nowadays. And I think it answers some of those questions. I would suggest reading Augustine if you're confused about that. I mean, he's
Augustine.
very or Augustine, sorry.
It's okay. It's either you can either say Augustine or Augustine.
It's like
I think that either
people just say it differently.
no. Well, no, it's like but it's like either of those are acceptable.
But like his most famous book was The Confessions. It was just like an autobiography. He's talking about one of my favorite quotes of his was like Christianity isn't just the Bible. I think he says like look above you, look below you. Like it's written in the world. It's the meaning is embedded. You know, we're not disembedded from the world. We're embedded creatures. So he's like Christianity is not just the Bible. It's not just sola scripture. It's not just the church. Those are things that point to what it is. They gesture towards it, but they are not it.
What do you think about Augustine's view on like evil babies? I think he mentioned in the Confessions that all babies
The
are
Christian guy in my class hated this. He was so angry. He was like, babies are like innocent and good, and how could you justify this? Or how could you say that they aren't good? And like blah blah blah. It was so funny.
I mean, yeah, it gets kind of funny if you go that far back, like the way people thought. I kind of like Kierkegaard's idea of sin better, and he kind of sees sin as it's not anything that we do specifically, but it's our heart. So if I murder someone, it's not the murder itself, but it's the fact that my heart is corrupted in some way. And he kind of explains how I mean, it's the concept of anxiety is like the hardest book. He talks about like the qualitative leap, the quantitative leap, and how we get into it's a whole mess that I don't really want to fully dive into.
This is like one of the things with Kierkegaard that I really don't understand is that it seems like faith is difficult, right? Or like true faith is difficult in so far as you have to like resign yourself to the paradox, but in order to that you have to like examine the paradox first, right? But then it seems like for things like sin, you don't really have to do a lot of like the same like internal work that you have to do for faith, right? Like he takes like a very like stoic approach to sin, which is just that it is what you are, it's what your intentions are. Like if you are intending to be good, you will do good, right? Like according to the Stoics. In the same way, I just like read Boethius, and so like this is like echoed in Boethius. It's echoed from Aristotle, from like the Platonic tradition, whatever. But I don't know how, I guess, like he can say that there are certain things that need to substantiate faith, whereas in the context of sin, it's like it's just like by wanting to do it, you have like already, I guess, like harmed yourself. You've already harmed your soul.
Yeah, I think you're confusing Johannes though with Kierkegaard. So, and it's kind of like in the Bible. It's like lusting after a woman, just like thinking about it is like the sin, and then people take that so far that thinking is evil or something. But I mean, I think what he's trying to do is not. I think he's taking the Socratic like critique of, because like Socrates, he never wrote anything down. And the reason for that is that he thought people would actually not know anything, like genuinely.
Yeah, I do classics, like that's like my thing.
Right. So Kierkegaard is basically like a neo-Socratic philosopher. He's trying to. I mean, he talks about poets a lot too, and how poetry sounds like silence to us, but it's because we're so shallow and chattery. But what he's trying to do is a Socratic thing where he wants us to actually know things. Like genuinely know something, not just read about it, but genuinely experience it. Like Socrates, the Socratic method was a process in which we come to actually know things. And I mean that in like a very embodied relational way with the world, not just reading about it. So I think he's doing it like a neo-Socratic project in a sense.
I feel like I can see like the influence of Socrates, I guess, like insofar as you have to like analyze faith to know it, or you have to kind of like question what you thought faith to be in the ethical. But I don't know if I know it like I don't know if I'm following much beyond that, I guess.
He's not
Like just insofar as it being like a Socratic project. Like I think I understand like the pen name stuff. As like being, you know, distinct from himself, and like also in like the whatever intro he taught, like he distinguishes I guess himself, and he also says, right, like he's like Johannes is like not a philosopher, he doesn't understand the system that he's operating within, but he's like trying to make sense of it. I thought
yeah,
like
it gets
he's trying to make
complicated.
sense of the ethical also, right? Like it's like he's trying to both make sense of the ethical as like a stepping stone to faith.
I mean, so he views Socrates, if I remember correctly, I mean, this is in Philosophical Fragments, Johannes Climacus. He basically says Socrates takes the aesthetic as far as it can go. And that's how he views Socrates. So what I say neo-Socratic because he's trying to continue the project in a Christian way. He's trying to elevate, instead of recollection, it's repetition. Instead of, if you read Philosophical Fragments, I think you would like that a lot more because that's a purely philosophical work. It's not a theological. You love that one because it goes over a lot of this.
I love philosophy. I'm not religious at all. So like my mom is a traditional Ashtanga yoga teacher. So I grew up celebrating like Hindu holidays. So I'm like I have like not like beyond like my own independent interest in like Christianity and like Christian scripture and like religious philosophy. I'm not religious. So I guess I don't know, maybe that might be like the disconnect, because I also like I read Kierkegaard and I'm like, wow, I really wish I believed in God, like in the way that he describes. Like, because I just like don't like, and I just like don't think I ever could. But yeah, I will add that. I have the Hong Princeton like Kierkegaard reader that I've been working through a little bit.
Oh yeah, the Essential Kierkegaard.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I love it. And I started reading some of the philosophical practice, and at least like some of the letters, because I thought those were interesting too.
Yeah, his letters and journals and all that stuff is really enlightening.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the letters, but I also like I was introduced to Kierkegaard with like the Truth is Subjectivity essay, where I think he talks about, like, I don't know if it was, I'm like forgetting now if it was like, I don't think that this was in his name. I might be wrong, because
it was
like if I remember
concluding unscientific postscript under Johannes Climacus.
Yeah, because like I was gonna say the way like the things that I remember pulling from this are like that he explicitly talks about the leap, and like the like metaphor that he uses for the leap is like the one that like has stuck with me for like how I understand his conception of faith, which is like the, you know, the young girl versus the like old woman thing. I think I mentioned this a few times on call, like here, I think. But I don't know. I think that's really interesting, and I will add that to my list. I'm just yapping now.
Yeah, read that Johannes Climacus. That's a good pen for philosophers. Like I said, the way you read Kierkegaard depends on your interests. Like if you want his Christian works, if you want his philosophical works, if you want like pastoral basically works. You know, there's a little bit something for everyone, including the poetic, which is what we're in right now, the very aesthetic poetic type thing.
Okay, wait, yeah, sorry. My last question then is like Socrates taking the aesthetic to like, you know, its endpoint or whatever, like to its completion as far as it can go. Like, it doesn't he just think of the like the at least the aesthetic man is like a hedonist, right? Like Socrates hated hedonism. That, I don't know. I feel like the way that he describes the aesthetic does not converge with like my understanding of Socrates's like role in philosophy, and like also in just like history of thought.
Well, what Socrates misses, according to Kierkegaard, is eternity. Socrates lives, the only conception of time he has is the past, recollecting, and into now, if that makes sense. He kind of sees the aesthetic as like worldly. It's very bound to, like, Socrates, he's doing the best he can in this world. Like, he's trying his hardest, and he reached almost like the peak humanity without God. Like, he basically sees Socrates as peak humanity without God.
He does still
Like
acknowledge
without God proper. Wait, but it's like, so without God proper though, right?
Yeah,
'Cause-
I mean, they believed in the gods, yes, and they had the whole. But
well, I mean, like
the Christian
like
God,
part
like,
of the reason why he was put. Well, yeah, that was like why, like, as part of the reason why he put to death, right? It's like he doesn't believe in the gods of Athens. Like, that's the apology.
right?
Oh, it's in the title.
Yeah.
But like, I guess how different is that from the Christian God, or how important is that difference? To Kierkegaard, it seems very, but I guess I'm asking like more so.
It's like it's really hard to explain. It's like, well, I need to cite the entire Bible to really, it's not an easy question to answer, because I think what Kierkegaard basically says is Christianity introduces the existential.
I don't know why it's what is either.
That's like
Okay.
the shortest way I can sum it up,
Okay.
and that's very inadequate, but I hope that points in the
No,
right
but-
direction.
No, it does. I think it definitely does. I'm gonna stop yapping.
No, it's fine.
Well, I mean, there's only 3 of us talking. Someone has to do the yapping.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
What I was thinking is, you mentioned that Socrates is only concerned with becoming the best person in this world in reality. But I think in Phaedrus and Meno, he speaks a lot about, or at least through Plato does through him, about the eternal of the soul, the everything, his whole theory of forms.
Yeah, the
Only, like,
Platonic
it's-
forms and all
well-
that stuff.
Right?
No, I see
Yeah,
what you're saying.
I also think this, but I also think like at least like the way the spin that Aristotle takes on this is that like the mind ends up being the enduring object of the body, right? So like that's the switch from Platonism to like the Aristotelian school, is that like
Right.
Aristotle thinks that like the soul is kind of like connected to the mind in a way that's like, I guess, like different. And Plato, that's like obviously a oversimplification, but I think that he is still like, I mean, like, and again, like his biggest push in the defense in the apology, right, is that that he will live on, right? Like he's not afraid of death because he knows that his soul will endure and he knows that he is good.
Yeah.
Like insofar as the divine sign has not told him that he has done anything bad. And that's like that's the negative check on his actions, which is like telling him when not to act.
Yeah, it gets really confusing because he only really talks about Socrates in his like Johannes Climacus, which is below his. It's kind of hard to tell what he directly thinks of Socrates. I will say there is a distinction between the infinite and the eternal in Kierkegaard's work. Like, living on forever, or like the eternal isn't bound to time. It's not about living forever to Kierkegaard. It's a completely different concept. It's a existential kind of thing. I mean, he talks about, if you want to go into the concept of anxiety, he talks about it.
Can you repeat what the difference between eternal and infinite is?
It's really hard to explain the eternal, but the eternal's not bound to time.
Is infinity bound?
It's the
There's different type, like, from my understanding.
yes, because it's a human concept. Eternity is related to divine concepts, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I know that's not clear. I know I'm still confusing a bit of Socrates, divinity and stuff, but it's really hard to explain without just reading like his books.
Well, it's also like Socrates doesn't distinguish between like a temporal understanding of like, or like, well, like he does. Like he thinks the gods are like, whatever, they are like not, they're in time, they're temporal, like they're not atemporal, but they are still eternal. And like I feel like that is like always the
Right,
distinction that
pantheistic type of thing.
correct. But I feel like that's the distinction here. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
There's a bit more. He talks a lot about time and eternity and the concept of anxiety. He goes over the Greeks concept of time. He goes over the Jewish concepts of time. He goes over the Catholics, and then finally his concept, well, the Vigilius Humphniensis concept of time, which is eternity, which is divorced from time. It's not like the present. It's not a spatial thing. It's not. Yeah.
Could we then rephrase it and say a little more simply then? Eternity is different than infinity brackets like temporal infinity.
Yeah, and Johannes doesn't know this either. Like, you can tell that Johannes is very much struggling with these concepts. He doesn't know how to relate them correctly.
So like is then I guess like maybe this context like contextualizes what you were saying earlier. So like this is like him kind of playing on the flaws of like Johannes de Silentio or whatever. As
Yeah.
as like pointing out like the instances of like paradox within faith.
Yeah, I mean, I
Also,
can
right? Like
I can
if it
find
relies on a misunderstanding, then I guess I don't know if that's necessarily made very clear.
I mean, let me just
Other than
put a
with, like the
direct
prep.
quote.
Yeah, please
Like,
do.
well, I don't have actually. This is not quite as good. This was a footnote in the point of view. I'll just put it there. But he divides them into different stages, and along with this footnote, maybe I'll be able to find the page in one of my PDFs. But he talks about the aesthetic books being a stepping stone. In a way, he's like, I can't reach these people by just shoving these concepts down without. He's trying to lead you there, and where there is not fully defined. He's not trying to say anything definitively. What he's trying to do is make you have an experience, so you're led beyond these stages and into something deeper. And Fear and Trembling is a stepping stone. Same with Either Or. Same with Repetition. These are all stepping stones, still in the aesthetic, so you can struggle with the pseudonymous authors.
Is the like are the pseudonymous like are they also in the aesthetic though? I guess is my question. Are they just like meant to be kind of like in the way that whatever Socrates is often like the placeholder like for Plato, the placeholder for like the reader, which is just like questioning the ideas that the other person engaging the dialogue puts forward. Is that like what's happening here, but in a way that's like
Yeah,
the
pretty
reader
much.
takes a less active part? Okay.
Yeah, he literally says his task is a Socratic one.
Okay. Well, all philosophers think that their tasks are Socratic. That's how they justify it.
Well, he's embodying it, right? He's trying. I mean, he says he falls short of it because he says he's too much of a writer and a poet, that he could never actually fully engage with it. But
And he
his
doesn't ask
task is
enough
try to lead you
questions.
there. Right. So his task, he feels, is to lead you there, and even though he couldn't fully get there himself, which is why he wrote The Sickness Unto Death, Anticlimacus, all that.
I don't know. It's 9 in the morning. It's too early to be reading. Like his cat.
Okay. I think like okay, the way that I then understand it is that it's like it's a Socratic project insofar as you are being asked to do the questioning that is catalyzed by what he writes. Like you are that it's like you are then meant to take on that onus.
Yeah,
as a
he's trying
reader.
to make reading an
Okay.
art. So every book you read, it's like puzzle pieces. You start to put them together. So it's kind of hard to like read Fear and Trembling and grasp almost anything he's saying without going further. I mean, you have to go on a journey with him if you want to understand him.
I mean, I'm down for sure. I'm down. I got the reader. I'm locked in.
And also, he has like over 20 some translated works into English. So when you talk about, which pseudonym is which, you're going to have to be very specific. He has so many. I mean, one of my favorites is Prefaces, which is just a guy whose wife will not let him write a book, so he only writes prefaces to books. So he's a lot of humor in a lot of his works.
The first case of a split personality.
Right. No.
So
That's pretty funny.
The first case was probably Plato. Let's be real.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what should we read? What should we read next, Cade? If you're gonna be joining us in the future.
Well, what are you more curious about the philosophical side? Do you want to know him more personally through his own self-authored works? What's
Um, so like, yeah, the way the book clubs have been going for what I've been doing them maybe for like a couple months now. The first thing we read was we did Nausea, which was just like the
Hmm.
novel by Sartre, and then we
Yeah,
did Notes from the Underground, and then we did
nice.
I'm forgetting the one before this if there was one. Oh yeah, we did essays by Montaigne, um, or essays from Bacon, or maybe I don't know, Montaigne or Bacon, I think. And then now we've done this one for the past like 4 or 5 weeks. But now it's time to pick the next book if you guys want to join in. I was thinking to do something in the classics because we haven't done that yet. So either the Republic or just like a one reading of like Euthyphro Dilemma, something more like just or just like the Apology, just one of his shorter essential dialogues. Or
Yeah,
I
sounds
don't think
good.
we've ever touched on anything medieval like Augustine type stuff. Or
I think Confessions would be cool, but I'm biased, and I
Yeah,
also want an
Confessions would be
excuse
really
to
cool
read.
too. I really
Well,
like that
but I'm
book.
also biased, and
Yeah.
I also just want an excuse to have to read Confessions in its entirety.
I like going
Yeah.
to Plato. I like what was his one book? It's like 30 pages. I think it's like Laches or Lakeys or something. I really like that one. That's one of my favorites. And it's quite short. So I don't know if you want to do like short books because you said Notes from the Underground, you said
yeah,
all this type of stuff.
yes,
Nausea not very short.
I know, but I'm ignoring. That's why I didn't say it.
I think Nausea we split that up in like four, and then Notes from Underground we split it up into two. This one we've split it up into maybe like five or four, something like that. Confessions would
Figure it
be a
made
big
you
one.
think then.
It would probably be like one or two books per meeting, and there's like what 10 books in there or like 11, but I don't know.
Yeah, there's
Be a little bit
a
longer.
lot.
I think there's 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we did want
I
to
mean,
put
I
the
like the pre-Socratics a lot too. So
Ooh, we
pre-Socratics
could
are kind of my
do.
favorite.
Okay, I like the pre-Socratics too. We could do. I'm trying to think of like who I really like. We could do like Animex. Oh, we could do like Lucretius and Democritus. They're very stoic. They're interesting. I guess they're not pre-Socratic. They're like contemporaries. And then Anaxander, Anaximenes. They're fun, but they're like natural philosophy.
Yeah, the only problem with pre-Socratics is a lot of their stuff is in fragments. Reading you can't just read Heraclitus. You have to read like a bunch of little.
Wait, well, we could read. Oh, that's Herodotus.
Well,
I was gonna say we
Parmenides
could read.
has an intact story somewhat.
And I think
Of him
that there
going to
isn't
the
there
underworld.
isn't there a dialogue? Isn't there a Platonic dialogue that's on Parmenides?
Yeah, I
Or
mean, Plato
I think
took a
that there.
lot from Parmenides. Parmenides is known
Yeah,
as the father of logic, and Plato reshaped it. Because I mean, Parmenides, it sounds like a fever dream. Like he goes down into a chariot, meets Persephone, and she gives him logic, and then he somehow actually makes logic out of it. He's the father of logic. It's pretty weird.
I have the Oxford classics, literally like the pre-Socratics fragments and testimonials or whatever. Testimonials. I think it's testimonials. Um, that I've worked through a few times, and it's the class that I like TA for and help out with is ancient philosophy, which like covers the Socratics or the pre-Socratics to Aristotle. But that could also be a good like text if you wanted to do fragments.
Yeah, I had a idea in mind.
Yeah.
Hmm?
I'll maybe put out to a vote. I'll have one pre-Socratic reading in there. I'll do one Platonic reading, Augustine, and then one more to make it four. Cade, suggestions.
I got so many. I'm kind of just okay with whatever anyone else wants. I'm obviously mostly in depth on Kierkegaard, but I'm well read. I've been reading. I mean, I'm only 20, but I've been reading philosophy for 8 years probably because my brother was into it, so he kind of like pushed me into it at a young age. type of
Damn,
thing.
I'm 20 also. You have a head start on me. I've only been reading for like 6 years.
It was really
Yeah, my
I
own
got I
little
gained
library next to me.
consciousness when I was 14.
Nice. I think I first read it was Diogenes, Plato, and then Nietzsche. That was my first readings, and I have all of Nietzsche's books right next to me as well.
I'm reading Twilight of the Idols,
Idols,
or it's
yeah,
on my stack. And then obviously like Thus Spoke Zarathustra is also on my stack.
I have this like 1950 edition of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So
That's really cool. That's fun.
I think I took a Nietzsche course in my first year of undergrad, and the way the professor wrote it on the board, he spelt it "thus spake Zarathustra." So I spent maybe like a week trying to track down "thus spake" versus "thus spoke" because I didn't know it was the same book. I ended up getting this
Yeah.
copy. I have like multiple good copies, but like the "thus spake" one, it's like big and like printed out on like a Word document and just like terrible Amazon quality with like typos all over it. But I didn't know there was a difference between "thus spoke" and "thus spake." Or I didn't know it was the same one, I mean.
hmm. I mean, when your professor's messing up like that, that's not a good sign. But
Because a lot of people say "thus spake," or he has like a weird accent spin all over, so he uses like people who write skeptical with a C versus a K. It's like, I don't know.
The Canadian accent makes it spake and not spoke, I think.
No, he's a
maybe.
Swedish guy. He was a Swedish guy with like one of those, I don't know. But
What
yeah,
was his name?
Anders Krall.
Crawl. I don't think I've read anything by
He's
Crawl.
friends with who else? You know Alvin Plantinga? The guy that
Yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah.
I love my professor. Is like he lived. Do you know who Martha Nussbaum is?
Yeah.
So he like I love her. I think she's like the coolest person ever, right? Because like also she was like she did classics when classics were such a boys' club. And my professor will just like drop randomly in class. He'll be like, oh, like he'll be like, oh, my like he'll say Martha and he'll be like, oh, my colleague, like Professor Nussbaum. Like they like live together in college and like they have like crazy lore,
that's
but
so
he only drops it. It's so cool.
I actually found
But
someone.
this is the person that I like work with.
I was scrolling through like what was it, like followers or something, and I saw the name Plantinga. So I messaged this person. Turns out it was his granddaughter. So she follows Plantinga's granddaughter.
No way.
Oh my god.
The
That's
philosopher.
so cool.
It's
Dude,
hilarious.
that's so cool. I mean, like his free will defense is revolutionary, groundbreaking.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I'll make a vote of those 3 or 4 things. A pre-Socratic, a Plato, Augustinian thing, and then I'll hear out from everyone else who isn't able to like join live.
If it's gonna be an Augustinian thing, I strongly feel that because like at least like so this summer I read with my professor and like a good friend of mine, and so he was like my professor was very like the first Augustine that you read should probably be Confessions because that's like where he just like lays out like that's like his personal understanding of like his relationship to God and like his relationship to Christianity and like where it I guess like falls into line with like other philosophers that came before him.
You know, I took a course on specifically that book, so it would be. I have some material. It would
Okay,
be.
so you're an expert. Wait,
I don't know
so
about
you should totally do it then.
I don't know about, but I've read it before, in depth, so I could help out on that one. But yeah, I guess I'll put it up to a vote, see what everyone else thinks, and then yeah, meet up next week, same time.
Cool.
Okay, cool potatoes. Thanks so much for joining, Cade. It was super nice to have your divine knowledge on Kierkegaard bestowed upon us.
It was nice to meet you, Cade.
Bestowed upon us.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be here. Yeah.
Sir,
I mean, if you have anything about Kierkegaard, like I spend all my days reading him. That's
I'll-
what I've been doing for
Can
the
I
past few
can I
years.
send you my questions from the other problemas?
Sure. I mean, I'll try
Okay.
my best to answer them. It's kind of better to answer it in a dialogue like this, though, too. So,
This is true. This is fair.
because then you're gonna find caveats in my, and I'm like, well, yes, I see the caveat, but I'm pointing to something that I can't fully explain now.
All right.
Yeah.
Sweet. Happy Halloween weekend. Very spooky. Go do some occult pagan things. I'll catch you guys next.
Awesome.
Yeah, for
See you
sure.
guys next week. Bye.